I will talk slowly, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me. I hope you see my whole screen now. I do not see any one of you, uh, but let's start. Just give a shout when you have a question. Don't hesitate to interrupt me. I will talk about the dialogical dynamics in working with the viable systems model. As you know, CO was founded based on the inspiration of Stafford Beer's work. Stafford Beer is a cybernetic professional. He is no longer amongst us, but his quest was to look for that what underlies all forms of organization, whether it would be organizational dimensions in nature, in organizations, in all kinds of settings. And his quest was a quest to manage better complexity. And it's that model that I take as a point of departure for today's introduction. He was one of the first systemic thinkers I got acquainted with. And the basic question, I hope you see my screen. You should see the screen with the question, what is a system? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So he asked himself the question, what is a system? And he provided a very, very simple answer, saying that a system is a collection of elements that interacts, whether it is on the cell level, the level of a human being. A human being can be considered as a collection of organs that interact with each other, whether it will be an industry, an organization, an economic system, or a governmental system. And his view was that you could describe any system in taking account three elements, which I will come back to in just a minute. His view was that reality is layered, and all forms of living systems are layered. And I will go into how that layering of reality is influencing the dialogical dynamics. For those who are more interested or interested in more detail, they can find quite some more information in the latest book I wrote with Otto Laske, named with the title Dynamic Collaboration. The practice book of dynamic collaboration, practices of dynamic collaboration. My apologies. He had a huge critique on traditional frameworks, considering organizations as hierarchies with different tasks, with different responsibilities attributed to different layers in the organization. And his critique was that those models, they model power, they model responsibility, and especially they model blame. When a supervisor is not delivering on his indicators, well, it can be a manager who he can point into, or the team leader who did not do the work. So a traditional hierarchy for him was a blame hierarchy. It didn't model what the organization did, how it does things. It doesn't model processes, nor basically how the organization is governed, because a lot of what happens in those types of organizations happens in the white spaces between the boxes. And you all know that most hierarchical structures also include a lot of project work where people work together beyond the boundaries of the box they are put into. Since Stafford Beer, there is a new model that appears, namely the model of the self-steering organization. And even on that model, he had a critique. It models teams, it models autonomy, it models relationships. But what it doesn't model is how decisions are made, how one does things in practice. Self-organizing concepts of organizations also do not model processes or structures. The model that Stafford Beer designed, and I will quickly explain it, he distinguishes three parts which you can distinguish from one another. Namely, each living system operates in an environment, whether that's a cell in an organ in a body in a community in a country structure, a country within a geographical region, etc., etc. Any living system performs a number of operations in the environment and has a kind of a meta system that governs the operations. And I will go into those three elements one by one. In the operations, if you compare it to a human body, you have different organs, and they perform a specific operation that is needed by the body to continue living in the environment. The lungs, they help the body to generate oxygen. The heart regulates the blood. In a company, you can have different operations focused on either different products which address different market needs, different geographical regions, different coherent process sets. So in any company, you have what Stafford Beer defines as a system one. A system one are the coherent activities that create a certain value add in the environment. And in order to have those operations work smoothly, you have a system two that regulates the system, and that happens within the system. That means that if, for example, you jogged for more than an hour, the heartbeat adapts itself automatically to your running rhythm according to the capability of your body. There is no high sophisticated system outside of the heart that regulates the heartbeat. The same for the breath and the lungs. So that's what he labels as system two. That's the system that enables any operation to self-regulate itself. But in each system, you also have a meta system, and that's what he labels system three. In every organization, there is no clear boundary between the different products, between the different process sets, between different geographical regions. There is always overlap, and system three regulates the overlaps and looks to whether system two works well, but also distributes the resources over the different operations. You could say that system three in many organizations is a kind of management system. But to really understand Steffen's Beer approach, you have those, you have the operations and the meta system in a layered way. For example, operators in a company, they also have a system 1, at their level a system 2, and a self-regulating system 3. System 3 helps to guide the performance in the here and now. And you also need a system 4. System 4 is the innovation system, which helps to identify what happens in the environment and helps to anticipate future developments in the environment. You could say that system 4 prepares for innovation, for renewal, while system 3 focuses on the here and now and the well-functioning in the actual situation. And you can feel that there is always a tension between system 3, the here and now, and system 4, which is the anticipation of the future. And you have a system 5 that regulates the tension between system 3 and system 4. To make it very simple, and a lot of colleagues that are more familiar with Steffens Beer's approach will say, hey, Jan, this is a bit too shortcut, but you could say that system 1, that every role has a system 1, which is focusing on clients and stakeholders. System 2 is what helps to plan and to coordinate what you're doing to clients and stakeholders. So system 1 is the real interaction with the environment. System 2 is the internal planning. System 3 is about the resources distribution amongst the different system 1s. Then you have an accountability for innovation, and you have an identity system, which is system number 5. Of course, in every organization, at every layer, you have the operations and the meta system within each layer of the organization. For example, you have in each organization a theme and a set of processes and activities that focus on quality and service. That's the work to be done, and that's often following a best practice approach. People operating in quality and service, for example, nurses in hospitals, operators in the make industry, but also market analysts in a research function. They often operate within the quality and service domain. And Steffens Beer's quest was to identify how he could envision the self-organizing at that level. At the level of quality and service, people need to comply with the best practices, and that happens through coordination. They need to self-coordinate. In the word coordination, there is the word order, discipline. That means that you have to comply with rules, with the collective knowledge of how things can be done in that particular situation. But as we know, clients change their expectations, they develop, and there is always a process of continuous improvement going on. Continuous improvement is basically focused on alignment of practices and procedures, new procedures with the old procedures. And the key to understand alignment is what I define as cooperation, agreeing on the modus operandi of how the procedures get outdated and need to be revised given changing market conditions, given changes in technology, given changes in the operating model. You have all kinds of changes that impact the current way of working. At the time, I had a lot of discussions with colleagues on how long is a business model that a company has and an operating model. How long can a company function without adapting the procedures and the practices? And research points out that that has decreased from, let's say, 20 years, about 20 years ago, to 1 to 2 years right now. Now, the continuous improvement always takes place within an end-to-end context. Continuous improvement mostly happens within teams, within functional specialization. For example, within the finance department, for the finance approach, within the operation department, for manufacturing, within the logistics department. But of course, all those departments need to communicate, and a lot of digital tools push companies to better define their value streams and their operational model. The key challenge in that complexity theme is to integrate things, and that follows the logic of co-construction. Some of you might have done brown sheet exercises. Brown sheet exercises are a good example of co-constructing the flows or co-reconstructing the flows in an organization. But the operational flow exercises take place within business modeling exercises. I often ask the question, how long can you keep a certain business model? And I often get answers such as between 2 years and 4 years. Well, if you look at, for example, Amazon, they changed their business model in their first 7 years more than 40 times. So the business models quickly get out of date, and you have a dynamic that you need to review business models to provide the context to adapt your operational flows, that provide the context to go into continuous improvement exercises. When you're often dealing with agile exercises, they mainly take place within the domain of continuous improvement, and they often fail because of the absence of the dialogue on operational flows and future business models. And you have more and more nowadays a layer of integrated ecosystems where the key of survival lays in the cooperation of your organization with other organizations, whether it be academic institutions, middle field organizations, political instances, and so on. And you have to weave your activities together in a process of co-evolution. So my work is around making the distinction between those different forms of creating coherence in what one does. Of course, reality is not as simple as that. And you have those different layers always interacting with each other, and you need to be able to map the stratification. What Stafford Beer doesn't take into account is how you can map the viability of the stratification in your company. And well, we are all familiar with traditional organizational charts. At the left, you see here a traditional organizational chart. The models that I'm developing help you to understand the quality of that traditional organizational chart by transforming it into a contribution-focused organizational chart. That is work inspired by Elliot Jaques and people working around work levels. The application I developed, the dynamic collaboration application, enables you to really objectify and measure the complexity theme at which a role is designed, and enables you to look at the relationships of roles. For example, you see here that the project management office role is designed at a more encompassing level than the service head, which means that the effective steering will take place by the project management office and not the service head. And there will be unclarity of roles between those two instances. You see that the professionals reporting into team lead B, that those roles are also designed to handle more complexity than the role of the team lead does. That means that the team lead will not be able to act as a sounding board for those professionals and will be bypassed by those professionals in decision making. But you also see that the senior professional role is designed at a continuous improvement theme, while the professionals at the left are the roles are designed within the value stream domain, which means that if you look at the three categories of professionals, those at the left, in the middle, and the right, they will talk along each other. They will not understand each other because they operate within a different complexity logic. And that creates basically slow decision making. That's what creates the understream of change or difficulty to change within an organization. At each level, you have 7 conversations for viability. You have, if I start at the bottom, the conversation whether the operations that we are developing are stable. Stable in the sense that they still make sense towards that segment of the environment that they were developed for. For example, an operator who uses his materials in a certain way can suddenly discover that there are better ways to handle the same material, and that he or she can gain more efficiency. There is a second conversation, which is an audit conversation between the system 3, which is a monitoring system, and the system 1. The monitoring system asks the question whether or not the accountability for stakeholders and clients is performed in the most efficient, the most productive way. There is also a third conversation, which is about coordination. That's the system 1 versus the system 2. The system 3 conversation is a conversation between system 3 and the several system 1s. and is about allocation of resources and the bargaining dialogue. How much resources do I get to help me adapt to the environment, or to help me in gaining, becoming more sustainable, gaining more efficiency, eliminating waste, etc., etc. That's the resource bargain dialogue. The fifth dialogue is the adaptation dialogue, which means that you need to have a system that overviews the developments in the environment. That's often a very weak developed system in many organizations, because it's put in the hands of a specific department, often either the marketing department, which does the market analysis, or the R&D department. But basically, you need that adaptation system at all levels in the organization. That means that also an operator needs to attend, for example, demonstrations of new technology in order to decide whether or not it makes sense for him within his role to adapt to those new developments. You have the scanning dialogue, and the last one is the identity dialogue. So the essence of those conversations is that there is always a tension that you can bring to the surface at any contribution theme that you distinguish. And so what Stefan Beer invites us to do is to look at the real complexity of the organization. And you can, of course, ask yourself, how do these 7 conversations differ in the different contribution teams? For example, is the coordination dialogue different in the continuous improvement domain versus the value stream domain? You can ask whether the resources bargain happens differently in the quality and service domain versus the other domains. In many organizations, for example, in a budgeting exercise, we start from one uniform budgeting process. But such a process never takes into account the real diversity of the interaction of the different elements in the system. And that's one of the reasons, according to Stefan Beer, why those uniform systems underperform. They shape insight in systems that does not take into account the real complexity of the situation. I don't know whether at this point there are any questions.